Hi everyone, forensic astrologer Grace Wilson and I are back, and today we're going to be analyzing the crime chart for the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell if you want reminders for my next show. And if you're interested in a personal astrology reading or a tutorial video on forensic astrology, you can refer to my website, forensicastrologer.com. And for additional cases, you can also go to Instagram and follow me on @forensicastrologer. So, Grace, today we're going to not only be reading the crime chart for Charlie Lindbergh, the baby who was kidnapped, and also the subject of a crime that was known as the crime of the century, the 20th century, but we'll also look at the marriage chart for the Lindberghs and birth charts for Charles, his wife Anne, and little Charlie himself. So we've got a lot of charts today, right?
We sure do.
For those of you who are new to forensic astrology, we look at the timestamp of the crime, and just like a birth chart is a profile of you, a timestamp of a crime is a profile of the event itself and exposes details. It's like the horoscope of the event. So if you understand the code, that's what this channel is all about, and we read that code. So Charlie Lindbergh was 20 months old when he was kidnapped and murdered in 1932. It has been said that the wrong person was convicted, and even Charles Lindbergh himself had something to do with the kidnappings. And we're so happy to have you on today too, because not only are you an astrologer and a forensic astrologer, but you also know your way around asteroids. So we're excited to see some of those and how the asteroids really come to life in some of these charts. So just a little bit about Charles Lindbergh. He was an American aviator and became an iconic figure in history. So he went from obscurity to an overnight sensation when he flew the first solo flight from New York to Paris. And that was the Spirit of St. Louis. Remember that, the Spirit. Lindbergh knew what he wanted to do at a young age, and I think destiny is so obvious in this case, and we'll see later when we read his birth chart. Young Charles spent a lot of time between Minnesota, his hometown, and Washington, D.C., since his father had to go back and forth. But his parents separated when he was 7, and he chose mechanical engineering as his college major, but ended up quitting college and enrolled in flight school. So then later he would join the Army. And in order to pay for flight lessons, he would work as a daredevil and a parachutist, and became known in that period as Daredevil Lindbergh. Once he became famous, he would be called Lucky Lindy by the press and public. In later years, his wife would join him as his co-pilot on international flights, and I believe she was traveling with him, and Grace, you know this, when she was 7 months pregnant. Here's some of the big headlines. We're talking New York Times. Every paper ran this story, obviously. There's the ransom note.
Ransom note. Mm-hmm.
This is Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Now, before we look at the crime chart, we're going to look at the marriage chart. And I think looking at this, and Grace, you probably agree, that this is eye-opening. And a marriage chart is what a bride might, it's usually a bride, when she wants to look at the time of her wedding to see if it will be auspicious. And it's really the personality of the marriage, if you look at it. And I think that some of these positions of these planets are just, they're so chilling. So do you want to go ahead and just pick out some of the things that you saw?
Well, I mean, it reads so beautifully. Like there's a nice trine. Neptune is at 28 degrees Leo, which is Regulus, which is the king degree. Then you have your T-square, meaning there was a lot of pressure on a woman, in this chart. So she's in the sixth house of misfortune. But Jupiter at Algol in the seventh house really speaks to me because that's an interesting place to have in a wedding chart. So I did some further research on some asteroids.
Okay.
And come to find out, there's an asteroid called Eugenesis. And you hit on a little bit that he had children with other women. And he was a big fan of the Nazis. He was also a eugenicist, which means he believed in like building a master race. So I found that asteroid and I looked it up first just in baby Charlie's chart, and it was at 26 Taurus. And that just jumped to me because I was like, that's in the marriage chart. So that just gave me chills to think about that.
That I would say that is pretty big, because just Jupiter at it's exact on the Algol degree. And so, and Jupiter in a marriage chart is the husband, Venus is the wife. There are a lot of planets in the seventh house. What do you think is the significance of that?
Well, this is the marriage of both of them. So this has got to be some kind of partnership that's going to affect their marriage in some way, which you've got Mercury at 22 degrees in Gemini, so death of a child.
When you look at crime charts and you want to look up asteroids, how do you know, like, what's your process? Do you just pull different asteroids that sound like certain people?
Yeah. Well, there's two different kinds of asteroids. Well, I mean, there's millions, I guess, probably. We don't know what's out there in the universe, but in astrology, there are asteroids that have been given particular meanings, like Ceres and Eris and those. And then there are what we consider personal name asteroids. So when you're looking at the older asteroids, you're looking, you'll have to have information about them, know what they're about. So if I'm looking at a crime chart and I'm wondering if the mother is involved, I'll add Ceres and a few of the other ones. Personal name asteroids, the asteroid name itself probably won't mean anything. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. But it will still show up amazingly in charts, even if you only have the first three letters the same as what you're looking for. For instance, in this chart, we've got Bruno opposite Chiron. And you've got Bruno at 17 degrees Aries, which is the opposite of that is called the 17 Libra is the arrest degree. So,
Yes.
he was arrested there. You've got Bruno at 9 degrees Cancer, which 9 degrees is the body in the ditch degree. It's a degree of homicide. Cancer, home. He was found near his home. When I look at the trine, though, I mean, I see Saturn in the second house. That represents the second house is values, but it's also in crime charts, it can be the source, like where is this coming from? If that makes any sense. If there's not a financial aspect to the crime, but there's something important in the second house, it might represent that.
Okay.
So this trine, from the second house to the sixth house, misfortune, to the 10th house in the public, just it was too easy. The Trine shows it was too easy.
That the public was deceived with that
Hmm.
Neptune.
Hmm.
That's so interesting. And let's face it, Bruno would be put to death. So, and over here uh, with this placement, there are quite a few Bruno asteroids. It's right next to Uranus, which would be the electric chair.
Yeah, in Aries, you're right.
Tend to use different charts. Most astrologers like the astro.com, but for some reason, the AstroSeek for me, I can see them clearly. So sometimes the audience is going to see different charts. But in this case, I saw a few things in the marriage chart, and that was how Neptune is so prominent. And Grace, you mentioned it's in Regulus, or it's on Regulus, which is the 29th degree of Leo. And that is the king degree or the royal degree. This was American royalty. And 18 at the MC, which is one of the strongest parts of the chart, that is evil. The could be the evil degree or the bad degree. And then Neptune is the spirit, so the spirit of St. Louis. So that's very prominent in there. And then the everyone's American dream. Now let's remember, it's right before the Depression. And as this happened, it was almost as if everyone's American dream, it was almost a symbol or an omen that the American dream was about to collapse. And so with Sagittarius, I see that as American. So the American dream is dead, perhaps. We have the vertex, which is the destiny point in the 8th house. So, and with a stellium there in the 8th, it shows a lot of power, a lot of strength. So the 8th house of death. And so if you had the destiny point with Jupiter, which would be Lindbergh, then his destiny would be harmed in a sense from this scandal or a mystery, or maybe he's the one who actually caused the mystery to begin with. Also, I see that he does not want Neptune also represents, I would say, paralysis. So he was not open to that theme of his dream, which was paralysis of his child. And Leo is a child, so a child is paralyzed. And I think the other thing too is the 9th house showing headlines that would be there's there's a killer in the headlines, a child killer is in the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's shocking with that trine with Uranus. Okay, so what I also think is interesting is the marriage chart is very close to the crime chart. And I believe Charlie's chart too. Lindbergh changed his plan that night. He said he was going to be late, and then he wasn't. He was supposed to speak at some dinner, and he decided not to. And then what happened was he told the staff and his wife to stay away from Charlie's room and not to coddle him, which of course they obeyed. And then when he got home, I think it was like 8:35 or something like that, the dog that he normally would allow to go into Charlie's room, he didn't go in there. He didn't allow him to go in there. So there are just little details that show things are just a little bit different than a normal night at the Lindbergh house.
Definitely.
And when you look at this chart, this crime chart, what's the first thing that you notice about it that's especially significant?
Well, to me, I mean, it just kind of shows the progression of the events. The signal was off, everybody was in their place. The moon was in the third house, so the mother was around, but not with the child. You've got Saturn at the 0 point. So something big is starting. And then you can see Mars, who's the ruler of the chart at this time, is getting ready to go into the 5th house, Charlie's room. And who's at the door of Charlie's room? The sun.
Exactly, meaning the father.
Exactly. And they're both opposite Neptune.
Mhm. Disguise
In
or
Virgo. And the 6th degree is a degree of disability. So if you see a planet at 6 Leo, it might be a disability of the eyes, or some type of disability. Virgo, I don't know, would suggest, well, Saturn suggests bones. We know he had rickets, but he had some kind of invisible disability that Charles just could not accept. So maybe he was a little brain damaged from the incident that happened at 7 months. That's when she had to go into the hospital.
oh, that's right. Okay, yes. Interesting. Now, yeah, Mars looks like he's in the house, and Mercury could show, obviously Mars is the baby.
We know that at this moment, the baby is being kidnapped,
Yeah.
give or take a few minutes.
Mhm.
So in this chart, with the Mars being the ruler and he's in the 4th house, I would say that Mars would be the baby because he's at home.
Yes. And it's a boy.
He's in Pisces. It's a boy, yeah. And he's in Pisces and he's with his dad, and
He has a disability.
yep, he's got some kind of disability.
Mhm.
So, but
Have you noticed that?
well, I mean, it's almost a mystic rectangle, but
Mhm.
since it isn't, and the top, I mean, that to me would say, yeah, it didn't happen the way they thought it would. But it did. I mean, only Bruno went to jail.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have Mercury here in the 5th, which would show maybe a ransom note. And
Yes.
also, we have 4 planets here, which can show uh, it. It could show a lot of people. So it's not just Lindbergh. If we were to see this as Lindbergh, he has a friend or he has a group with him, or a foreign group with this North Node representing foreign, and Pisces can mean foreign too. So it seems like there are quite a few foreign people involved.
That's a possibility.
Mhm. So now with Jupiter in the 10th, it's right near one of the worst degrees of the zodiac, and that's
Mhm.
Leo 15. And it is trining Uranus and Venus. And that would also show that there was a woman who committed suicide. So that's also in the chart. Somebody who worked for them, which would be the 6th house.
Mhm.
What did she know? I don't know. So that's another mystery too, I think. All right. So now we'll go to Anne's chart. And this looks like a bucket to me, or a bowl, but she seemed to have lived a long life. Maybe a sad one. She had a lot of children, but there are just so many planets in the 10th. And Grace, what do you see when you look at her birth chart?
Oh, well, she just had a lot of action in her life. And her life was very public. She didn't have very much to herself, probably. Uh, I think she was wealthy. Wasn't her family wealthy? Yeah. Um, but one thing that I notice is she has Black Moon Lilith and an asteroid called Circe, or Circe, some people call it. Um, and they're at 27 Taurus, which is where that eugenesis is, and also where Jupiter is in the marriage chart.
That's right. That's right. So you're
Mhm.
potentially saying or implying that that element was at the very least in her life.
Mhm.
But as far as what she thinks about it, can you see that in the chart?
Well, she's got Uranus in her fourth house, which is the basis of the matter, or the end of the matter. And so I feel like it was just a huge shock to her. And I don't think she ever suspected, because she doesn't have anything in her 12th. She doesn't have any hidden secrets.
No, that's good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it starts in Leo, which is, ruled by the sun, which can be the sun in some charts. So,
Mhm.
and her sun is at the 0 degree. So that makes a lot of sense, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting in her day, apparently the women were very, very protective of her in the public. You could not, I believe there was a Time magazine article that was written about her that wasn't exactly um, positive, and that I guess the editor got into a lot of trouble with the females or the female audience. So all her life, females felt like they knew her or they were very close to her and they just fiercely defended her. So I think that shows there with Moon and Mars, where women or the public were just um, very defensive for her and defended her.
Yes.
And then with Pluto, Pluto and Jupiter there is just unbelievable. That is an emphasis of just being an icon, I would say. And now
Mhm.
her seventh house representing her husband would be Jupiter. Jupiter in general represents the husband, and look at how he is just right on that MC. And you know who else has this in her birth chart is Angelina Jolie. Not to say that Brad Pitt is like the icon of the world like Lindbergh was, but it does show that your husband is going to be very much in the
Very famous.
public
Mhm.
eye. And
Plus, her dad was too.
her dad, there's her dad, the son. So there was so much. Yeah, he was, I guess he was an ambassador, and that's how they met. They had him over for dinner. So, so yeah, with the moon there, there's so much emotion because of these emphasizer planets. So I don't remember seeing a birth chart that had that many planets in there. Now it does look a little packed because we added a couple of asteroids in there. Did you want
Mhm.
to talk about any of them that we added in the 10th or anywhere else in the chart?
Well, in this particular chart, we were talking about, is there a conspiracy? So a bit more research into the case, and I found out that there was a doctor that was an acquaintance of uh, Charles, and he insisted, absolutely insisted, on handling everything about the kidnapping. He, the rest of the kidnapping notes went to him. He was the one that, took the money to the drop off. He handled everything. He had an acquaintance called John Knoll. And he looked a lot like the sketch of the kidnapper. So I threw those in, and it just was fascinating because you've got Richard, which is Bruno Hauptmann, right there on the MC. And then you've got, let me see, Dr. Conlon in the fourth house, right next to her, Uranus at the sixth disability degree. And then they're opposite the moon and Mars. So, that shows that he was involved with some kind of shock
Absolutely.
around her.
Mm-hmm. And what about this one right here in the first?
Ganymede was a young boy who was kidnapped. And it's on her second house cusp. I mean, kidnapped for money.
Yes. Interesting. How did you know to look at that one?
Research. I mean,
So
I've looked at so many charts
uh-huh.
over the years and done so much research on, because I'll find what I used to do when I was first learning all this. There's a place called serenu.com, and it lists all of the asteroids, just like you can put in any time, date, and you get exactly where everything was that day. So I look at the angles, and then I look at the appropriate planets in whatever I'm involved in, and I look at what asteroids are right there, and I keep my orb very tight for asteroids,
Okay.
like only a half a degree.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and some use even 3 or 4 depending on like the sun, because it has a wider influence. And I will sometimes do that too, if it's like the sun or the moon, because they're the luminaries. And then whenever I would find a name, I would do research on that name. And sometimes it would just be wild, because the name would be of the person who found it, but then something about that person, like where they were born or what they were famous for or whatever, somehow will relate back to the chart. So Ganymede is, like I said, he, one of the first cases I ever worked on was Casey Anthony. And so she was saying her little girl was kidnapped. And I was just trying to find anything that I could about kidnapping with some of the, the older asteroids. And Ganymede came up. So
It's amazing. So that would be a good asteroid with kidnappings to look
of
at
young boys.
Of young boys. Okay. It's I'm looking at Uranus here, which is to fly, and the 6th is the thickness. So when she was flying as a mother, she was pregnant, which would be, I want to say that was Pluto, but as pregnancy, but that one trip may just have determined how the rest of her life would pan out. That one trip that might have harmed her child. If the child had never been harmed, who knows if someone had a murder or not to take him away, or to a motive or not to murder him.
Exactly.
Let's see what else.
So, and this is her chart. So this is all foreshadowing that all of this would come,
A lot of people are scared when they see their birth chart, when they see all these red lines and all, but what would you say to somebody who wants their birth chart read and they see something like this? There's so many potentially amazing, charmed life types of characteristics, but then they see that Uranus. How would you counsel somebody like that? Would you say, well,
Well, in personal charts,
mhm,
the opposition can also kind of be a because of this, this happened, because of this happened. And so I kind of explain, well, because of these two planets, it's going to have you focus on this planet. It's going to energize you, the square. The opposition is going to create the square that's going to energize you to use this planet in whatever way that planet, whatever, if it's Venus, it could be money or, you know, art or writing, if it's Mercury, whatever it is.
or you,
So,
and going by that, you're getting energy by being married to an icon who flies. And
mhm,
so thus you will be flying.
mhm.
And you might want to fly a lot because he likes to fly a lot. So that's interesting. Okay. Uh, and Charles Lindbergh, there is his birth chart. What kind of shape is that? It's really, you can't really
Well,
call it.
that is, yeah, that's called a seesaw because you have like, it's lopsided, but you have, some planets here and then more planets over here.
Okay. The good and the
And
bad and the ugly.
pretty much,
And when you look at his birth chart, can you see what sticks out to you the most?
well, part of fortune, Anne, is conjunct his part of fortune. So marrying her really helped him
Yes.
in a lot of ways. Black Moon Lilith at 29 Scorpio in the first house. He had some secrets. He was a little wild
Absolutely. Well,
in
like you said earlier on, he had many different children by different wives. So
mhm,
that would support
mhm,
that for sure.
exactly. And he's got Saturn on his third death of a child, and Jupiter, which is the helper.
Mhm.
So did he help? I don't know. And he's got Venus and um I'm sorry. He has Venus and Mercury as the basis. At the end of the matter was a woman and a child in Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune, or co-ruled by Neptune and also Jupiter. Jupiter being the helper at the 29th or the anorectic degree of Cancer or Capricorn.
Stellium,
That's
this is a super
a
stellium.
lot of,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, there's just a lot of foreshadowing.
Go ahead.
And it's Aquarius is intercepted. So he was all about the air, and the air was in his third house. Mhm.
And then with Moon next to Uranus, that would be a famous pilot with Moon showing fame.
And Sagittarius
Um,
showing foreign because he went across.
any fixed stars you wanted to look at? This in the 12th is really interesting with the kidnapping.
Well, right. Well, Charles has right there at 21 Mercury is a fixed star called Unical High. I'm not good at pronunciation, so it's probably the wrong, but Unukalhai, Unical High. And this is a star that represents the abused one.
Okay.
So
And that's in Gemini?
No, it's on,
Mercury.
sorry. It's on his ascendant in Scorpio. It's at 21 Scorpio.
Oh, really? Gosh.
Hmm. And then that's conjunct Ganymede, which is the
The
kidnapping of his son. And it's a mystery. And it's in his 12th house. So it could have been his self undoing, but since it wasn't, that to me says that he has a secret.
And this opposition, what does that mean?
Therius is the hunter. Therius is the kidnapper. He's the one that
Okay.
he's known as the hunter. He's very prominent in charts where there's been a stalking or a kidnapping for money.
Okay. Well, and with Mars next to Mercury, which could be a child, that can show abuse. And with the fifth house Lord being Mars, that also is abuse in the family. So, and then a square there with Black Moon Lilith. With Charlie Lindbergh's birth chart, hold on a second here. This has some interesting aspects. He was an ascendant Libra, a sun Cancer at 0 degrees. And he has a nice grand trine from, well, it's not really that nice because it's a grand trine that where you had noted that Richard is on the end of that grand trine. So there was easy access to him.
And Circe is next to him, so he had help.
That's right. So there's a lot. The T square is extremely strong and it points right to the 8th house. And in this birth chart, you can have a stellium in a birth chart and the person becomes a real estate magnet. And there's a lot of activity in the 8th. But in this case, you have a lot of malefics. You've got North Node, you've got Mars, and then Chiron for being wounded with Moon right there in his home. He was murdered, or that's where it all started, was his home. But now that the 8th house is ruled by Mars, so that's interesting. And so there's just a double confirmation that there was abuse with his death. So the 4th house is the end of the matter. What is your thought here with this, with Theris? Is this Theris?
Therius.
Therius. That being with Therius being at the end of the 4th house of the baby, how does that resonate?
To me, Therius is, the hunter. He was hunted. He was preyed upon at his house. And, it's opposite Venus, which is, on the 10th, 11th house. So it was because of money or because of his famous father, because Leo is ruled by the sun.
And the sun being in Cancer sometimes shows fame, so a famous father, and elevated not just by the top of the chart, but with Jupiter there, that is a very famous person that everybody talks about with the 29th degree in Gemini. And that's transportation, let's face it. So the father would have something to do with transportation and a lot of transportation. In fact, Lindbergh, he had a huge role in American aviation, and he was an advisor to, I guess, government contractors, and I think it was Boeing and a few other companies. But anyway, as far as, I think the 5th house also with the Black Moon Lilith there, that's an aviation family. You've got, I'm crying here. The 5th house is we've got Aquarius here. So that's the aviation family, but you've got Black Moon Lilith. So there's something there that's nefarious or something that you can't see in the fifth house that basically that he couldn't see that came for him.
It sure does. Now, I know degrees are your thing,
Mhm.
but if you take a look at all the nines in this chart. Now, nines in some degree interpretations can stand for the body in the ditch degree, which is, a body that's been dumped. 9 Gemini is actually a degree of homicide. That's just like straight up. And the moon in the 8th house is at 9. Saturn, the 4th house, end of the matter is Saturn at 9. And Capricorn is a very violent, brutal sign. So a lot of times when Capricorn is in a chart that's prominent in a chart of a victim or an actual crime, they've been beaten, which is exactly how the baby was killed.
Absolutely. And the ninth degree represents the father. In Vedic astrology, 9 or Sagittarius is the father. Saturn retrograde, Saturn in Vedic astrology is the father. Retrograde is a disappointment, whether being your father's disappointment or your father disappoints you. So, and that being at the very bottom of the chart, that was the downfall of this child, was the father. Father couldn't protect him, and God knows what else. So, what a fascinating chart. And the public too, with Moon here, the public knew all about this death. And let's see. Oh, look at this. Pluto at the 18th degree. So we have some may call it the devil degree or the evil degree. So it was an evil death that was shocking, with Uranus being here in the 7th. So now his head, he was killed by being beaten, I think, in, was it head injuries?
Yes.
So that would make sense with Aries ruling his 8th. So
right.
Fascinating stuff. Is there anything else you want to add? I think we've focused on a lot.
No, I just, I really enjoyed this one. I really like being able to look at the past in a different light. And I heard about this and read about it. I was always into mysteries, even as a kid. And so I always like to read about true crime. But looking at it this time with you and looking at all of the placements, I always thought Bruno did it, no big deal. I mean, that's just all I knew. And now I'm like, wow, that's a pretty big mystery that they freaking got away with.
Exactly.
And Bruno was the patsy. My theory is that Bruno, the woman, contacted Bruno and told Bruno, I'll split the money with you if you do this. Bruno was the patsy. He didn't know anybody else but the woman. And she had him write the first note and told him what to say and what to do. And he had no one to give up when he was on trial. He couldn't point to the father because he didn't know about the father. Couldn't point to the woman because she was already dead.
Amazing. And I had read, though, that he had kept these notes that were traceable, which he used, and that's how they found him. But they were wrapped in 1936 paper or 1934 paper. And he said he had gotten it from a friend of his who was a little shady and who may have been closer to the crime. So there's that side of it too, where he was completely outside and he just happened to be the holder of shady notes and he didn't tell his wife about them. but his friend owed him money and he took it. So I think that may be a possibility as well. I don't know how those two stories fit together.
But this was a very fascinating case, and I appreciate you letting me work on this with you.
Thank you so much. And everyone is always interested in your take and your experience with not just forensic astrology, but also the asteroids. So thank you. And we hope you come on again. And if you have any questions, just email us or reach out to me on forensicastrologer.com. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.